Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Again, I am going to be discussing a subject related to the Baha'i faith. It is one that I have discussed before, but I discussed it outside the context of the Baha'i faith, because at that time, I was not revealing. I feel like some kind of like a banker that has hid a huge sum of money and I haven't told anybody where it is. Anyway, I was not revealing that my religion was the source of what I was saying. And now, since I've discussed my religion, it's out in the open. I will put it into the context of my religion. Now, once again, the reason why I was not discussing my religion was not because I'm afraid to discuss it, but it was because I was hesitant to do that, since my podcast was basically devoted to my sociological theory, dialectical meta-realism, which incorporates a variety of things which are not related to the Baha'i faith, like Maoism, third worldism, intersectional Marxism, kyriarchy, various other things as well, which I'd mentioned before. And so I felt as though it was simply inappropriate to mention it. And I felt that it might even give a bad impression of my religion. But what I did in that podcast is I explained very carefully, I think, that my religion and my sociology are separate. And so when I talk about Israel and Gaza, and when I talk about the issue of genocide, which I think I can do, based especially on that letter from the Baha'i international community, which explicitly condemns genocide. And so what I am doing is applying that letter to a real life situation. And I feel justified now in doing it. I was cautious. I was nervous about doing it before, but now I am no longer nervous. I am liberated. Not exactly, but I feel somewhat more secure in discussing my religion now, since I have already made clear that I make a distinction between my religion and my sociology. I do not try to superimpose one upon the other. I believe in the harmony of science and religion, but that does not mean that they are the same. And I think that is especially important in my case, since my sociological theory involves some things which outside of sociology might be seen as controversial. Now, is Maoism controversial in sociology? No, not at all. Is Maoism third worldism controversial in sociology? The answer to that is most people who are sociologists have never even heard of Maoism third worldism. So by definition, it would not be controversial. And Maoism third worldism really has almost nothing to do with Maoism in a standard sense. It is a kind of heterodox Maoism. Heterodox meaning unconventional, not unorthodox, but unconventional Maoism. It is not Maoism as Mao Zedong conceived of it. And so I realized that those things and more are controversial, and that is why I was really, really careful not to mention the Baha'i faith by name, because I did not want to give the Baha'i faith a bad reputation. But I think that the benefits of me talking about the Baha'i faith outweigh that, especially since I spent months coming up with a way to do it. And I hope that I have succeeded of discussing my sociological theory as a distinct aspect of my life from my religion. And they are distinct. Does that mean I don't relate them to each other? No. I mean, I am a single being, so of course I relate them to each other. They are both aspects of who I am. I am not a divided being. I am one being. And so, no, I'm not trying to divide myself in half. And I have not done that. And I would not want to do that. Okay, so in this particular episode of the podcast, I will be returning to a subject I have discussed before. And that subject is the subject of Ḥūriyyaʿ. Ḥūriyyaʿ, which is Arabic. In Turkish, it is Huri. In Persian, it is Hori. But it's the same word. It is a Semitic word. Of course, Persian and Turkish are not Semitic languages. They are Indo-European languages. So they have borrowed from the Semitic Ḥūriyyaʿ and turned it into Huri and Hori. I hope I haven't confused you. I don't think so. I think what I'm saying is pretty clear. But regardless, Ḥūriyyaʿ is from the feminine root, HR in English. It is a feminine root. Got that? It is a feminine root. And it means darkness and light. Darkness and light. And so when you put those things together, feminine, masculine, but in this case, feminine, darkness and light, that's where the concept of maiden comes in. In the Quran, Ḥūriyyaʿ is commonly translated, I'm sure many of you know this, but I will say it anyway, I don't like this, as virgin. What that does is that creates the impression that when people die, I guess especially men, that they have all these virgins waiting for them. That is really a distortion. Now, it's not wrong. It's not a bad translation. I mean, you can translate Ḥūriyyaʿ as virgin if you want, but there is no implication of sexuality in the Quran at all. No implication of sexuality at all. It is a sexually neutral reference. So the Guardian's translation as maiden is much better than the common Quranic, whatever the translation, the common Quranic rendering as virgin. What I have done in my provisional translation of Ḥūriyyaʿ is to expand it by referring to the fact that HR is a feminine root, plus that it refers to darkness and light. And so my translation, black-eyed maiden of white light. I realize that is an elaboration. It is not a literal translation, but I love it. And I love it for a reason which will become apparent as I discuss it. But I think it is a perfectly legitimate provisional translation of Ḥūriyyaʿ, whether in the Quran or in the writings of Baha'u'llah. It's the same word, again, that is translated by many Quranic scholars, unfortunately, I would say, as virgin, which the Guardian translates as maiden. I'm sorry for repeating myself, but I'm trying to get my point as clear as I possibly can. Okay. Now, the notion of Ḥūriyyaʿ is a very important one in the Baha'i faith. Why? In every, or almost every, revelation that I know of, maybe not every one, but most, there is a reference to an awakener. Often that awakener is portrayed as an angel. For example, many people talk about the burning bush that awakened Moses. What they leave out is that in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, it does not just say burning bush. It says burning bush filled with angels. Yes, burning bush filled with angels. So it's not just an inanimate bush. The emphasis should be on the angels, in my opinion, not on the bush. Same thing with Zoroaster. It talks about the sacred fire, but the sacred fire is filled with angels in the Zend-Avesta, the holy book of Zoroastrianism, filled with angels. And so again, I think the emphasis should be on those angels, or as I would call them, holy spirits. With Krishna, the feminine counterpart to Krishna, is also, in my view, one of these holy spirits or angels. And they are discussed throughout the Vedas and throughout the Bhagavad Gita. These angels that accompany Krishna, the same kind of thing. These awakeners that accompany Krishna. With Eve, in my view, can be understood as the awakener of Adam. Now, there is an interpretation given of the story of Adam and Eve in Some Answered Questions. And then what Abdu'l-Baha says is that there are other interpretations of the story as well. Reflect upon the story until you discover the others. But in my view, the interpretation given by Abdu'l-Baha is an interpretation of Eve as an awakener. But it takes a knowledge of Persian, which fortunately I have to a degree, to see that. If you're reading it only in English translation, it's not something that you will see. And so it's somewhat confusing. The Guardian always recommended that Baha'is study the original languages. Sadly, most Western Baha'is have not taken him up on that. It is very helpful knowing Persian and, if possible, Arabic as well, in order to have a better grasp of the original writings. Failing that, one may have a distorted view of what the Baha'i texts are saying. So, in the case of Baha'u'llah, he has his own Holy Spirit. Remember Some Answered Questions, a very important Baha'i text. In Some Answered Questions, Shoghi Effendi refers to these beings that awaken the prophets as holy spirits. As holy spirits. Remember the Valley of Wonderment in the Seven Valleys. Baha'u'llah talks about these wondrous beings that inhabit the Valley of Wonderment. And he explains it as a mystery. And it is a mystery, because these are mysterious beings. We see them in our dreams. the valley of wonderment to us as human beings, is the world of dreams. That's where we go. When we go to sleep, we see these beings in our dreams, to my understanding. Most of us do not usually recall our dreams. I know I do not usually recall them. Sometimes I do. When I recall them, they're kind of jumbled, metaphorical. Sometimes in my dreams, I have a common experience that others have, where my dreams carry over into wakefulness. And so I will continue with my dream after I wake up. The dream will not end until I begin thinking about it. At that point, the dream will suddenly end. I don't seem to have any control over that, because sooner or later, you're awake, and so your mind will take over, and you will begin trying to understand what is happening. And then the dream will end because you're no longer in a dream state. You are no longer in a receptive state to be able to receive that dream. So dreams, in my experience, the valley of wonderment can be experienced in dreams, but sometimes we can remain in the valley of wonderment even after we wake up. At least that has been my own personal experience. In my view, the valley of wonderment, or the world of dreams, or Jacob's ladder, whatever you want to call it, is the plane on which these wondrous Holy Spirits like Ḥūriyyaʿ, like Eve, like Gabriel, like the dove, etc., reside. That is their world. If you look at the story of Jacob's ladder, which I love, it's a wonderful story in the Tanakh, the Old Testament. I sometimes revert back to my Hebrew school education where we said Tanakh all the time, not Old Testament. And because I like the word Tanakh. It's descriptive of what are the actual books that are contained in the Old Testament. It's an acronym. Basically, Tanakh is an acronym for the books in the Old Testament. When I look at that story, what it says is that these angels, as it calls them, in Jacob's vision, climbed up and down a ladder between earth and heaven. What a miraculous, marvelous way of describing these Holy Spirits, or angels, if you will. That they have access not only to their own plane, which Baha'u'llah calls the Valley of Wonderment, but they also have access to earth, where we live, and to heaven, where we will be going when we die. And so we will see them, I assume, when we die. In fact, it is one reason, one of many reasons, I look forward to dying. I'm not suicidal, but I love the idea of death. Baha'u'llah said, I have made death a comforter to thee. Wherefore doth thou grieve? That's how I see it. Death is a comforter. I want to be in the world to come. I have seen intimations, subjectively, of course, my own experiences are miraculous, I guess, and are not a proof to anyone. As Abdu'l-Baha said, miracles are a proof for the bystander only, and even the bystander may question them. So I am not asking you to accept the legitimacy of my experiences, but I will share them with you nonetheless. I've shared them with a lot of people, and I have no problem with sharing them with anyone who wants to hear them, or even you who maybe have not asked to hear them, but are watching me in this podcast episode. And so I see these metaphorical things that are in dreams. The Guardian said that dreams are often mixed up with interpretations. With imagination, and therefore cannot be relied upon. Yes, that's very frequently the case. But the question is, how do we interpret dreams? Is it necessary to understand the dream, what it means, in other words? That concept of the interpretation of dreams primarily goes back to Sigmund Freud and his, in my view, destruction of the reality of dreams by turning them into a place of libido or sex and violence. And that has stayed with us till the present day. Other psychoanalysts and psychotherapists have developed modifications of that, but all of them basically have looked at the idea that the patient tells the dream to the psychotherapist, and the psychotherapist then attempts to interpret it. That is not how I personally see dreams. I am not going to say that it is wrong. I will just say that it is not the way I personally approach dreams. I never say that somebody is wrong. I think that is an improper way of approaching the ideas of somebody. You welcome the ideas of other people. You don't dismiss them. You accept them as possibilities, but you don't necessarily accept them for yourself. You simply sit there and take it in and then reflect. And whether you accept the ideas or not, that is up to you. But you don't argue with people. That is not in the spirit of consultation. You simply listen, you take what people say in, you reflect on their ideas, and then you come to your own conclusions, however tentative they may be. So, the interpretation of dreams, what are they? The interpretation of dreams, in my view, is the understandings that one reaches through being in the Valley of Wonderment. Give you an example. The Holy Spirit for this age, Baha'u'llah calls her the Most Great Spirit, but also calls her Ḥūriyyaʿ. My provisional translation, the black-eyed maiden of white light. The interpretation of dreams, for me, means before I go to bed, I will ask the maiden for guidance. When I wake up, to be honest with you, not always, but almost always, the question I asked is at the tip of my tongue. I should say the answer to the question is at the tip of my tongue. But it's not only true in dreams. I have drawn so close to Ḥūriyyaʿ, whom I will get to in just a bit, more specifically, that I spent last week the whole day looking for my reading glasses and could not find them. And I was sitting in front of this computer where I'm sitting right now, and I turned to Ḥūriyyaʿ. And I said, Ḥūriyyaʿ, can you please help me find my glasses? I had a sudden impulse. It was literally an impulse to turn around 180 degrees. And there the glasses were behind me, right behind me. I don't know why I did not see them when I was looking for them myself, because I looked in that place, and yet I did not see them. But Ḥūriyyaʿ, when she told me to turn around and made me turn around, I literally turned around and there they were. So I find that Ḥūriyyaʿ guides me not only in dreams, but also when I'm awake many times. I have become so close to Ḥūriyyaʿ that I don't know how to describe that relationship, but I will get into that more in just a bit. It is a very mystical and mysterious thing to me because Ḥūriyyaʿ has transformed my life. What I always ask when I discuss this subject is that if anyone has had a similar experience, to please let me know. Please let me know. Please, I beg you, please let me know. Because so far, no one that I've met has acknowledged having a similar experience. That saddens me. Do I feel alone? No. Not alone. But I feel sad because Ḥūriyyaʿ brings me so much love. And I wonder, what's going on? What's going on? Let me tell you the story. I'm getting ahead of myself. And when I tell you the story, it will make sense. Okay. I am an autistic guy. When I was a kid, I was noticeably autistic. I was very autistic. My behavior was very, very strange. I would get beaten up practically every day walking home from school. Then when I got home, I was frequently beat up by my father. I would sit at my desk in school and pee. And pee. Why? I have no idea. I have tried to reflect back on that and ask myself why I was doing it, but I don't know. Even back then, when I was a kid, I would ask myself why I did it, and I didn't know. And yet the next day, I would do it again. A big puddle would form around my desk, and I get no pleasure in telling the story, obviously. It was very embarrassing. Very, very embarrassing. I would collect bottles of pee in my bedroom. Why? I don't know. Sometimes 20, 30, 40. I don't know why I didn't empty them. Now, was there a justification for my doing it? In some ways, because my sister would hog the upstairs bathroom, putting on makeup. And so I couldn't get in. And my parents were not very cooperative in nudging her to allow me to go to the bathroom. My parents were not very nice to me when I was a child. They really did not like me. I would say they hated me. I was literally the black sheep of the family. I was the demon of the family, and I knew it, which is not very pleasant, especially if you are an autistic. I was under heavy psychotropic drugs. I received 12 electric shock treatments while hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital for 2.5 months, from which I had total amnesia for 1 year. I forgot everything. I forgot how to read. to write, and to do math. Everything. Everything. I did not forget my name. That's about it. My name I remembered. So my life was really bad, but why did I do that thing with the peeing? I wish I could figure it out, but it doesn't really matter. I don't have to. I don't do that anymore at 68 years old. So it's not an issue for me now, but it's troublesome when I look back on my life and I realize how low functioning and autistic I was. I could barely talk without stuttering outside the home. In the home, I could talk sort of well, but I would still stutter. My mother would yell at me when I would stutter, which didn't help. But outside the home, I stuttered so much that literally I could not get a word out. So that was my autism as a kid. And it was worse than that. I'm just telling you the highlights. I was lost. I had no friends until I became a Baha'i at 14. I had to get my parents' written consent to become a Baha'i at 14. So I became a Baha'i at what they called at that time, and I believe they still call, a junior youth. Gradually, through a lot of pain and sorrow, by being misplaced, put into a place called BOCES in New York, the Board of Cooperative Educational Services, which was one step away from reform school. They put me there because they did not know what to do with me. I was the victim, and yet I was treated as if I were the perpetrator. I mean, it's hard. I've prayed and prayed and prayed to forgive those people. And I have to varying degrees. Not completely, but to varying degrees. I hope at some point I will forgive all of them completely, because there's no point in holding grudges and being angry. It only hurts me. But it's hard. It's hard, given my state of mind. So I was put into this special school, which was even worse. The diagnoses of ADHD and oppositional defiant disorder did not exist back then. But my suspicion is that the majority of kids in BOCES had that. And so I was treated worse in BOCES than I was in public school. How nice, wasn't it? Then I found out that I could not graduate high school. I would have to get a GED, a general equivalency diploma. At that point, I protested to my mother. And I protested. And I protested. And finally, she called up the school and asked them to put me back in the public school, which they did. By that time, for some reason, the kids stopped bothering me. What do I think happened? Dating. The kids were more interested in dating than they were in me. They didn't care about me anymore. My first day back, a teacher who for some reason never liked me walked up to me and said, "Why did you come back?" I just stared at her. I didn't know what to say. I just stared at her. Very sad. Very, very sad. And Now, I'm not looking for pity or compassion. I'm just sharing this. I'm sharing the story for a reason. There is a method to my madness. I'm not doing it to get pity from anybody. I'm doing it as a way of explaining something, and I will get to that in just a bit. So that was my life as a child, and there's much more to it than that. Much more to it than that. Like I was put on orthomolecular therapy, megavitamins, which doesn't work, doesn't exist anymore. Orthomolecular psychiatry. There is no such thing anymore. But it was a big deal back then. I refused to take it because I was told they were only vitamins. But I saw in the midst of the vitamins Thorazine, and I knew Thorazine. I had taken many psychotropic drugs, but Thorazine was the most consistent one. And I did not want to be on Thorazine again because it turned me into a zombie. And I argued with my mother, and I should have ultimately refused. I mean, what was she going to do? Stuffed it down my throat? No, of course not. Eventually, I gave in, which I should not have done. I should not have given in to her. I realize that now, but when you're 15, you don't think of it that way. That's how old I was at that time. So a month went by, and I said, Mom, I'm not taking them anymore. We argued and argued, and I would not give in at that point. She called my old child psychiatrist, who we stopped seeing because he moved from New York City to Los Angeles to become the head of the psychiatry department at, I believe it was UCLA. And he was a very educated man, and we actually became friends later on. He was not very nice to me when I was a kid, but as an adult, we kind of related as colleagues. Him as a psychiatrist, me with a Ph.D. in sociology. So our discussions were more academic than anything else. And he told me how impressed he was with me and how much I had changed. And I said, yeah, and I have no idea why. I have no idea why. And he said, me neither. He said, I told your mother that I thought you would spend the rest of your life on disability. And I say, I know, she told me that. She told me that too. But no, I got a PhD, became a tenured full professor, at one point dean. So none of those predictions panned out. I am an exception. I know a lot of autistics who are not exceptions like I was. And many of their lives are totally miserable and have been for their entire lives into their elder years. My friend Steve, for example, who was 7 years older than me. Same diagnosis as I had. Schizophrenia, childhood type. That's what they called autism in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Schizophrenia, childhood type. That was my diagnosis. But if you read the description, as I did later, I now have PDF copies of all of the DSMs from the first up to the current one, which is the DSM-5-TR. It said in the DSM-1, which I was diagnosed under, and in the DSM-2, it defined schizophrenia childhood type as autism. But I was never told that. I was treated as if I were a schizophrenic, and I was never a schizophrenic. I was never delusional. Never. I always had a firm grasp on reality, even though I sometimes wished I did not, because it was painful. My reality was not good. Okay, enough of that. I can go on, but there's no point to going on. What happened as I got older? I became relatively well-adjusted, but I had no empathy, which is very common in autistics, especially autistic males, boys and men. I had no love. I remember sitting down one time and crying. But I was crying not because I felt bad, but I was crying out of absence, because I had no love. I did not love anybody. I had no heart. When I became a Baha'i at 14, I did not love Baha'u'llah. I accepted him, but I did not love him. I did not love him at all. No love. These days, I prefer the term intersubjectivity to empathy. Intersubjectivity, a term coined by the founder of phenomenological philosophy, Edmund Husserl, that describes more of what I think was at least my experience at the time, a lack of intersubjectivity. Psychiatrists call it theory of mind. That's fine, but it's confusing. I prefer intersubjectivity, but I had none. I had no heart. I could fake it. As a Baha'i, I learned to fake it by watching other people and standing in front of a mirror and imitating them. That's how I did it. That's how I got through my youth, was by imitation, because I couldn't do it any other way. I had no knowledge of how to behave in any other way, because I didn't know what it meant to be emotional. I wanted to date, but no girls would have anything to do with me. Till this day, at 68, I have never had a girlfriend. Now I really don't want to, because I'm kind of adjusted to the way I am right now. So I don't know if I could. I think I could have a girlfriend now, at least emotionally, which I couldn't when I was younger, but I'm so used to being alone. Having a girlfriend now, I think, would be very difficult adjustment. So now I'm content to be single. It doesn't bother me at my age, but it did bother me when I was younger, because I saw everyone else dating, and when I would try, I would always fall flat on my face. I later learned that is true of almost all autistics, especially autistic men and boys. But I didn't know that. I didn't even know I was autistic. I thought I was schizophrenic, but schizophrenic using the more modern definition of the term, which made no sense to me because I knew I was not delusional. So it didn't fit. So I kind of dismissed all that. About 20 years ago, I was praying intently for some type of visitation. I didn't know what that meant. I prayed for a visitation. One morning, I felt 2 knocks on my bed, like somebody had bumped into my bed twice. And then the person with a female voice, and I can't do a female voice with my deep voice, but something like, oh, that's the best I can do. And I was startled. It woke me up. I sat up. I looked at the foot of my bed, and there I saw her. A being of light. Humanoid shape. Multicolored face. Not a human being. Her arms stretched outright to me like that. I thought I was dreaming. And maybe with the fact that I now think of dreams in a different way than I did back then, that dreams are not distinct from this world. They are basically a continuation, or this world, I guess you could say, is a continuation of the Valley of Wonderment or the world of dreams. But regardless, I was up. I was not asleep. And I was transfixed by her, as anyone might imagine. Had no idea who she was. But she left after, I don't know how long, maybe a few seconds, a minute. I don't know. I thought, well, maybe I should go back to sleep. Then I thought to myself, what are you, an idiot? Just like that. How can you go back to sleep after that? And so I got up, talked myself out of going back to sleep, and looked around my bedroom. And I noticed that my key ring was missing from the push pin in my wall. That's where I kept it. I looked all over my apartment for that key ring. I checked my pockets. I checked the area around the front door. I could not find it. Hours. I went down and spoke with Dana, a good friend and also the property manager. I'm still friends with Dana till this day. We speak on the phone periodically, even though I no longer live in Kansas. I live in South Texas, deep South Texas, 2 miles from Mexico. And I told Dana the story I just told you in an abridged form. And she said, well, Mark, you need to call the police. And I said, Dana, if I call the police and tell me the story, tell the police officer the story, they will put me in a straitjacket. And Dana said, no, 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 don't tell them the story. Just tell them that your keys are missing. I did not want to do that. But I thought about it for a minute. I put my head down. And I said, well, I guess so. I called the police. A police officer named Steve, I forget his last name, came over. He did not see the keys either, so it wasn't just me. He photographed not only my bedroom, but the rest of my apartment and said, we will do an investigation. I said, thank you. I appreciate that. We shook hands. We were joking around too. We had a nice association, a nice meeting. He was a nice guy, at least to me. He was a very nice guy. And 2 mornings later, I woke up and the keys were hanging from the pushpin. The keys were hanging from the pushpin. I thought of different possibilities. Maybe I had taken them off, maybe I had put them back on, but I'm not a sleepwalker, or I think it's called a somnambulist. I don't walk in my sleep. Never have. No, the keys were put back on by somebody else. And it occurred to me that it was most likely that being who was in my bedroom 2 mornings before. I don't know that, but I think that's true. So this day was 20 years ago, but I still think that was true. I have all sorts of ideas of what that meant, that she was giving me the keys to my heart. Who knows if that's true? That was just a passing thought I had. What I noticed, however, is that all of a sudden, I had empathy. I loved everyone. I loved people that I wished I had loved earlier, but could not. And I loved them passionately. I remember thinking of Zekrullah Khadem, and I remember Zekrullah very dearly. He was one of the finest men I ever met. I got to know him as a friend because we used to drive back and forth from Greenacre to New York, and then he would fly back to O'Hare Airport in Chicago. And so I got to know Zekrullah and Jabidou Khadem very well. And we would joke a lot. Zekrullah had a wonderful sense of humor. You would never know that from watching him speak. But he had a wonderful sense of humor. And we would tell jokes to each other. But I did not love him. I had a good sense of humor. I was a ventriloquist. So I had a good sense of humor, which is basically being a stand-up comic. With with an assistant, a non-human assistant. But all of a sudden, I loved him. The Baha'is I knew, I loved them. People I did not know, I loved them. I loved everyone. I had empathy for all the people suffering all around the world. I had a heart. I felt like, I believe it was the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz that did not have a heart. I felt like the Tin Man as a little kid. I remember watching that show, that movie, and thinking, that Tin Man is me. But then, of course, at the end of the movie, the Tin Man is given a heart, sort of. I mean, a big heart, but symbolic of a heart. And what you realize, of course, the moral of the story was that he always had a heart, of course. That the Scarecrow always had a brain. The Cowardly Lion always had courage. All that stuff. They just didn't recognize it. But no, I didn't have any of those things. I shouldn't say I didn't have any of those things. I had no heart, no intersubjectivity, no empathy at all. I was totally screwed up. Totally screwed up. But all of a sudden, that changed. And I tried to think, who was that being? I thought of all these crazy possibilities. Could it be an interdimensional being? Could it be an alien, which kind of Shocked me that I was considering that. And then all of a sudden, I recalled the story of the maiden created by the spirit of Baha. Created by the spirit of Baha. The most great spirit of the Valley of Wonderment, as I sometimes call her, just for me, the queen of the Valley of Wonderment. I said, my God, the maiden came to me. The only other case that I knew of and still know of till this day, which honestly troubles me. Maybe it troubles me in the sense of troubles my humility. That's probably a good way of putting it. Is when Ḥūriyyaʿ came to Baha'u'llah and was his comforter for his entire life. I saw what she looked like. Multicolored face, light streaming from all over her body, humanoid-shaped body. That was how she looked to me. I don't know if that's the way she looked to Baha'u'llah, but I instantly knew when I thought of it that she was the maiden. That was 20 years ago. Since that time, and I realize I'm talking about what Abdu'l-Baha calls miracles, and so I don't expect anyone to believe me at all. It's my experience and only my experience. I realized that just as Ḥūriyyaʿ had awakened, the Holy Spirit had awakened Baha'u'llah as the awakener, she also awakened me out of my autism. Does that mean I'm not an autistic anymore? No. Autism is a neurological disorder. I am not a part of the anti-cure movement or the so-called neurodiversity movement. Why? Because I don't want to see anyone go through what I went through as a child. No one. Which has made me unpopular in some circles because I don't support the anti-cure movement, which is fine. I don't care. But I can tell you this also. Ḥūriyyaʿ is with me all the time. On my left side, with her head leaning on my left shoulder. Obviously, I don't see her. That's a sense. But when I turn there, I have like this feeling of how she's shaped, and it's very, very weird. I don't see her, but I feel her. I feel the pressure on my shoulder. I feel her moving on my shoulder. She is with me. What bothers me is that with all the times I have shared the story with Baha'is, and sometimes with non-Baha'is as well, but mostly with Baha'is, no one has ever told me that they had an experience like that. That is what I meant when I said it troubles my humility. Why me? Why me? I am an ant, and I am not saying that to impress anyone. That's literally how I see myself. I'm a cockroach. I'm nothing. I felt as though I did not deserve her, but it was not for me to make that determination. For whatever reason, ḤūriyyaÖ came to me of her own will, or she was asked by Baha'u'llah to come to me, something. A few years later, came across a picture, photograph. It was a mother who took the photograph, and she was taking a photograph of her 8-year-old daughter who was playing on some outdoor rides. Her daughter was dying of cancer. When the photo was developed, or I'm not even sure what you call it now. I guess it's not called developed anymore. That shows you how much knowledge I have of modern photography. I have never used the camera in my cell phone. Anyway, when the photo was developed, or whatever it's called, I saw a being who looked exactly like the being who stood at the foot of my bed. Exactly. Exactly. Again, with her arms stretched out. There was a story accompanying the photograph. What it said is that the next time she went to her hematologist for a checkup, her cancer was gone. The hematologist obviously could not explain it. I mean, those things happen from time to time, these miraculous or unexplainable cures, recoveries. But he could not explain it. Obviously, how do you explain something like that? The cancer was out of her body. I think that was the maiden too, or maybe another Holy Spirit that looked like the maiden. I don't know. But I think it was the maiden. She looked and felt like the maiden. So for whatever reason, she appears to me to select who to come to. And it is for that reason that I don't understand why she came to me. Of all people, I know a lot of people who are much more deserving than I am. People who are suffering much more than I am. What about the people now in Gaza? What about them? What about the people suffering in Haiti, in Bangladesh, in India, and in other third and fourth world parts of the globe? Maybe she comes to them too, selectively. I don't know. I assume there is a logic to it, a divine logic that I don't grasp. But if ever there was a person who did not deserve it, it is me. And I'm not saying that to impress anyone. That is literally how I feel. And I'm saying that because who am I? I'm nobody special. There are a lot of people with PhDs in sociology. So what? There are a lot of ventriloquists. There are a lot of Baha'is. Why me? Why has no other Baha'i I have met had that experience? Or at least been willing to tell me? I don't know. Or maybe the maiden came to them in their sleep and they didn't see her. But in that case, it would not have been the same experience because she literally woke me up. So I would see her. It embarrasses me to say the following. This is really, really embarrassing. That the only other being that I know of to have an experience which resembles mine is the Blessed Beauty. That's what bothers me. That's what bothers me. It makes no sense to me. Because literally, I mean, that's what happened to Baha'u'llah. The maiden woke him up from his sleep and stayed with him for his entire life. Just like the maiden is staying with me. I can't comprehend it. It is a mystery beyond mysteries. Maybe I'm not meant to understand it. Maybe not until I go into the next world where I can have conscious communication, perhaps, with Ḥūriyyaʿ and ask her, which I hope to do. Before I bow down and kiss her on the forehead, I would kiss her on her hands, but I think that's forbidden, so I wouldn't do that. But I would kiss her on her forehead. And that is why I look forward so much to death. Because of her. That is the major reason. I mean, I can feel her right now, but feeling her, I can't talk with her. Maybe I talk with her when I'm asleep, but if so, I don't remember it. I know that she conveys information to me because I pray to her and I get an answer when I wake up. Or I pray to her when I'm awake and she answers my prayer. Literally, like I said, the keys were right behind me, but I did not see them. When I said, "Maiden, please help me find the keys." That's exactly what I said. "Maiden, please help me find the keys." I felt an urge, an impulse to turn my chair 180 degrees around, and there the keys were. So what do I make of that? I don't know. But here's what I do believe. That regardless of whether you have had or will have an experience like mine, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it mattered for me, which is why she came to me in the way she did. She can still awaken you. Because after a Holy Spirit, and again, a Holy Spirit is a being. They're beings. They're sentient beings. Described by Shoghi Effendi in Semantic Questions, described by Baha'u'llah in the Valley of Wonderment. They're beings. Conscious, wonderful, loving beings. But even if you cannot or will not have the same experience or similar experience to the one that I had. And I can't say more than that, because that would result in a further comparison with Baha'u'llah, which would literally devastate me. I could not do that. I feel like I would fall over in pain. It doesn't matter, because she can still awaken you. She is there. She comes to the prophet, or he, Gabriel, comes to the prophet, or she, Eve, comes to the prophet, or she, Radha, comes to Krishna, whatever, and awakens that prophetic being. And then she is available, the Holy Spirit, to awaken everyone else who is open to that Holy Spirit, that being, her or him. So these Holy Spirits apparently have gender in some way, I guess. Maybe not, but that's the way it seems to me at this time. Ḥūriyyaʿ is certainly a feminine being. Tell you one more thing before I end this podcast episode. I was debating whether to say this, but I'll go ahead and say it. It's weird. A couple of weeks after I had that experience with Ḥūriyyaʿ, I turned to her. I was in the bathroom for some reason. Why, I don't know. But I closed my eyes and turned to her, and I said, Ḥūriyyaʿ, will you be my wife? That sounds so odd. So odd. I know it sounds odd. It sounds ridiculous. Then, a couple of weeks after that, I was back in the bathroom. I don't know what it is with the bathroom and me. But I was back in the bathroom. I closed my eyes again, and I saw an image of her face, and I knew what her face looked like. And I took that as a yes, rightly or wrongly. And since that time, I think it was rightly. I mean, she never leaves me. So my view is, and again, take it with a grain of salt. Take everything I said with a grain of salt. My view is that the maiden is a polyandrous being. Polyandry is female polygamy. It's the opposite of polygyny, which is male polygamy. So it's a woman with multiple husbands. I think, maybe I'm wrong, that the maiden is polyandrous and can have many husbands. The maiden, the sentient Holy Spirit, a being, an actual being, can come to you, awaken you, and then you can be with her too, I think, or I hope, especially if you are suffering right now. And I don't know if there are any people like that. I'm not a Pentecostal preacher where I can get these intuitions, supposed intuitions about people in the audience who have infirmities. Thank God I'm not one of those. But if you are suffering right now, I believe that you can turn to Ḥūriyya뾱. Remember Ḥūriyya뾱. Remember her. Remember who she is. Remember how she awakened Baha'u'llah. Ask her to awaken you. Couldn't hurt. See what happens. Do it in a very humble way, a prayerful way. I pray to Ḥūriyya뾱all the time, just as I pray to Baha'u'llah, the Bab, Abdul Baha, Shawqi Effendi, my parents, my spiritual mother, Elizabeth Thomas, and anyone else I can think of at the time. I pray to them. The Guardian said we can pray to anyone, including himself. That's a pilgrim's note, by the way, but I take it seriously, even though it's a pilgrim's note. So in any event, regardless, you can take my story with a grain of salt, all of it. You can take my story of becoming a husband to Ḥūriyya뾱, of having her as my wife. Throw it out. I don't care. It makes no difference. You don't need it. You don't need my story. It's not going to help you. Only Ḥūriyya뾱can help you, not me. I cannot help you. If I can do anything, it's that by telling you the story to encourage you to establish your own relationship with Ḥūriyya뾱, the black-eyed maiden of white light. She is both omnipresent, meaning ubiquitous or everywhere, and present, meaning she can be any place that she wants, like on my shoulder, while at the same time being everywhere. She is a magnificent being. Why the Holy Spirit is misunderstood by so many people as a force, I will never know. That is one thing that Orthodox Christianity got right, that the Holy Spirit is a person. I have never seen any explanation of what they mean by that. I don't think that they know. It fits the model of the Trinity, so I guess they have to say that she's a person too. Whatever. Sophia, sometimes referred to as the Holy Spirit in Christianity or in certain of the more metaphysical sects of Christianity. Regardless, reject my story, throw it in the trash. You don't need it. You don't need my story. Pray to Ḥūriyya뾱. Pray to her. Pray to her now. I am about to end this episode of the podcast. You don't need me. I'm of no use to you. Only Ḥūriyya뾱. Only Ḥūriyya뾱is of use to you. Well, in addition, of course, to Baha'u'llah, the Bab, Abdul Baha, Shawqi Effendi, and so on. But I mean, what I mean by that is that she's of use to you, I am not. That's what I should have said. I will end it on that note with prayers for your grace, your healing, and your forgiveness, because we all need forgiveness. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.